Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. This is a place for vibrant discussions about mindfulness, movement practices, and ways to find more balance and presence in daily life. Here you'll find resources to help you progress on your path, as well as insightful conversations with mindful movement, yoga, meditation, and Dharma teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight embodied approaches to mindfulness and the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hello, everyone. Thanks for hanging out with me today. This episode is going to be a little different than usual because it's about a book. I'm going to be talking about Dacher Keltner's new book, Awe, The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. Because, in case you didn't know, researchers are actually studying awe, as in that feeling of amazement or wonder, the experience of having your jaw drop or getting goosebumps. It turns out this is really good for us. There are health benefits, physical benefits, mental health benefits for us as individuals, but there are also big implications for how awe affects our attitudes towards others and the planet. I've been really interested in the research on awe that's coming out of the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley for a few years, so I was excited when this book came out at the beginning of this year, 2023. This episode is not so much a book review as it is a book recommendation, because I'm not interested in being a literary critic. That's not my thing. And why bother talking about something on my podcast unless I like it, right? So what I wanted to do today is to share some of my takeaways from this book and bring out a few of the themes that are relevant to mindfulness and well-being and many of the other topics that we talk about here on the podcast. Quick question before we dive in to this topic. Did you know that there's a Moved to Meditate class library? It is an online catalog of mindful movement, yin yoga, and meditation practices that bring to life many of the ideas you hear about here on the podcast. And did you know that there is a free tier to the library membership? As with a real library, there are some titles in the Moved to Meditate library that you can access for free. Each month, there are 5 classes that are available within the free tier of the membership. You just sign up for your free library card, and that gives you a login where you can access the free classes. So jump onto my website at movedtomeditate.yoga/class library to find out more. You can also find more resources related to each podcast episode on my website. Just go to movedtomeditate.yoga/podcast for the show notes and the links, like the details on this book that we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so this book, it's called Awe, The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. And it was written by Dacher Keltner, who is a psychology professor and researcher at the University of California, UC Berkeley. He's the faculty director at the Greater Good Science Center, which does a lot of really cool work around the science of social and emotional well-being and applied practices like mindfulness, compassion, gratitude, all this stuff that we love here. His work is well known enough that he was asked to be a consultant for the Pixar film Inside Out. Remember that one? So here's a definition of awe from the Greater Good Science Center. Awe is the feeling we get in the presence of something vast that challenges our understanding of the world, like looking up at millions of stars in the night sky or marveling at the birth of a child. If you hear yourself saying, wow, you might be experiencing awe. Do you ever catch yourself just going, wow? That's awe. Awe can come in big moments that knock your socks off. And we can catch little glimmers of everyday awe or things that just kind of remind us of something bigger. We seem to instinctually seek out awe as human beings. Whether we're conscious of it or not, this is one of the reasons that People visit the Grand Canyon or go tour vast cathedrals or make pilgrimages to ancient wonders like the pyramids. We can also touch awe by observing the power or beauty of nature, seeing an incredibly accomplished act like a stunning musical performance, or witnessing a generous or heroic act by another person, or having a spiritual experience. In his book, Dr. Keltner devotes a chapter each to 8 different categories of awe. His research team created this framework out of the results from a massive worldwide study where they gathered narratives of awe experiences from 2,600 people in 26 different countries, being careful to collect stories from a diverse sample, including people of many religions, economic and educational backgrounds, living under different political systems with very different cultural norms. They were looking for the common universal threads of this human experience of awe. Interestingly, the most common source of awe worldwide was what they called moral beauty, being amazed by the kindness, courage, tenacity, or goodness of other humans, like a great leader who advocates for social change and inspires others, or an ordinary person persisting through cancer treatments. How refreshing is that, right? I know we tend to be inundated with crappy news about how much humanity sucks. But what if that is skewed? What if we as practitioners set the intention to look for more opportunities to be inspired by others, to see the goodness? Who and what do we consider worthy of admiration? Another category of awe is something called collective effervescence. I love that term, collective effervescence. That refers to getting swept up in a moment with others, particularly in synchronized movement. So interesting. You can also read about collective effervescence in Kelly McGonigal's book, The Joy of Movement, where she talks about how moving in unison in like an exercise class or in a yoga flow or on a dance floor with others, it creates all these great neurochemicals in our brains that basically make us happier and friendlier to others, which is kind of amazing. But picture everyone at a wedding reception joyfully dancing the electric slide, or the fans at the Super Bowl doing the wave together, or when you go for a walk with a friend, how you unconsciously synchronize your steps. One of the benefits of collective effervescence is that we get to experience our sense of self as a little more open and porous and connected. We can sort of temporarily merge or connect deeply with others or with the natural environment, all of which helps us to be a bit less self-obsessed, or you could say it helps us hold ourselves in a greater context, feeling how we're part of something bigger. Another of my favorite categories of awe is the wonder we experience in nature. It's not surprising that nature is a big source of awe, right? And it's not surprising if you follow me on Instagram that I would think that, right? It turns out, though, that this nature awe has some really measurable benefits. Here's a quote from the book. It says, "With respect to the neurophysiology of wild awe, the sights, sounds, scents, and tastes of nature lead to awe-related vagus nerve activation and reduce fight-or-flight cardiovascular response, blood pressure, cortisol, and inflammation. Here are but a few empirical examples of how our bodies are like antennae when outdoors in nature. The sounds of water activate the vagus nerve. Certain scents in nature calm our stress-related physiology. Many plants give off photosides, chemical compounds that reduce blood pressure and boost immune function. Encounters with images of nature lead to the activation of dopamine networks in the brain, which animate exploration and wonder." Whoa, right? I need to finish this podcast so I can go outside for a walk. As a side note, you'll hear even more about nature next week because my next episode is a conversation with my sciencey friend, Jessica Patching Bunch of Body Brain Resilience, and it's all about green exercise. We're going to be talking about the benefits of movement in nature. So stay tuned for that next week. But back to the awe book, we have moral beauty, we have nature awe, we have collective effervescence. But there's other categories of awe that he writes about, like a category of awe that relates to music. It's such a common source of awe that it has its own category. And also visual awe, like we might experience in art, architecture, or even the geometric patterns that we can see in nature. There's also spiritual awe, the self-transcendent or perspective-altering experiences that we can have through contemplative practices. The possibility of mystical awe, as he calls it in the book, is present in all religions and spiritual systems, but maybe more deliberately cultivated and encouraged in some. I think of some of my early experiences in meditation, like the first time I went on a weekend-long silent retreat. On the final night of the retreat, I was doing walking meditation in the courtyard, and there was a moment when I looked down at the ants on the pathway and then up at the moon, and I felt this profound oneness. It's really hard to describe because it wasn't an experience of my conceptual mind, but it was kind of like the distance between me and the ants and the moon had just like collapsed. We were the same. It was the deepest connection and sense of belonging, really, that I've ever felt. And I knew I would never forget that short moment. And many people have had such moments through meditation or through yoga or through prayer or other kinds of contemplative practices. In the book, Dr. Keltner suggests that mystical experiences like a strong and sudden oneness involve a deactivation of the brain's default mode network, which is the part of the brain that builds up the sense of self through comparing, worrying, planning, and ruminating. And that activity is replaced in a mystical experience by activation of the brain regions involved in joy and bliss. It's a temporary experience, but it can have a lasting impact on your perspective and your worldview and your sense of what's possible. The last category is the awe of experiencing life and death. The power and reality of life, death, and grief as potential awe events. One of the interesting things about awe is that it isn't always about pleasant experiences. Remember the phrase shock and awe? Awe can be awful close to fear because it's confronting and it puts us into contact with things that shake up our sense of the expected or what we can control. For example, recently I was messaging with a teacher of mine who had recently lost her closest friend. A dear friend, colleague, an admired human being was suddenly gone. And my teacher commented that losing this friend had been a profound and layered experience. The choice of words was so striking to me. She didn't say a terrible and painful experience, although I'm sure it was, but her phrasing of profound and layered, that really points to this expression of awe, the amazingness of being alive in the first place, the depth of loss, the confusion it brings despite its inevitability. It certainly fits the definition of awe, something vast or deep that requires accommodation. In other words, it forces our perspective to adapt. There's so much more about all of this in the book. It's really an inspiring read. It also includes a little bit of interesting background on the history of research of human emotions and how this whole area was considered for a long time to be too subjective and unscientific, and people ignored it. And then how eventually when they started to do research on emotions, they first started with negative feelings like fear and anger, which was kind of interesting. And it took a lot longer for positive states like compassion or joy or awe to get any attention. But thankfully, we are now learning some really cool things about awe, like how it enhances mood and feelings of life satisfaction. We're learning that exposure to awe may help people improve their discernment and critical thinking. One study showed that experiences of awe were correlated with decreased inflammation markers in the body. And we know that inflammation is connected with so many pain processes and disease processes in the body. Awe is also seen as an experience that can shift our attention away from the individual self towards the feeling of being part of a greater whole. So it results in decreasing materialism. Interesting. And increases in generosity and cooperative behavior. That could be pretty helpful for us as human beings coexisting on this planet, don't you think? Even on an everyday practical level, moments of awe can just help get us out of the tunnel vision of being in stress and survival mode and help us see possibilities. It can shake our assumptions and reorient us to what really matters to us. So I'll leave it there for now. I hope you found this topic awesome. I couldn't help it, sorry. But do be sure to check out the show notes at movedtomeditate.yoga/podcast because I'm going to put several different links to articles about this topic that you can check out and also the book itself so you can learn more about the benefits of awe and how you might go about practicing awe. And let me know if you read this book. I would really love to hear what you think and how you're cultivating more awe in your life. So thanks for being here. Be well until next time, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the podcast. So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend and or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find us that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, live online classes, teacher trainings, and private lessons, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. Thanks so much for listening.